Welcome to Where Mindset Meets Movement. I'm Brennan Copley, and I'm a personal trainer and an athletic trainer and a former Division I athlete. Over the last decade, I've worked with a wide variety of individuals. I've worked with youth athletes, I've worked with elite athletes, and everyday people that are just looking to get stronger, move better without pain, as well as just people that want to look more confident in their bodies.
And I'm Zach Konacki. I'm a former swimmer, swam at the University of Arizona, and competed at the 2012 U.S. Olympic trials. I also spent about 10 years coaching swimming. I'm a professor at Iona University, and I'm a mental performance coach. The work that I do in mental performance is to help athletes, young athletes, as young as middle school, athletes as old as professional athletes in their 20s and 30s, to develop strategies to help them maximize their performance, whether that comes to performance anxiety management or positive self-talk, confidence. So very excited about this work that we're going to do here together.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so we created this podcast because throughout our athletic careers and coaching careers and countless conversations together, we found ourselves coming back to some of the same questions. And you touched on them a little bit, but the big one for me, like right from the get-go of why I initially called you, was the one that was, why do some people thrive under pressure and while others struggle? And some of that was like stemmed from me watching some World Cup or just watching sports recently. And I've just been like pondering that question, but also some of it comes back to, growing up and going through sports and endeavors myself. Other things like, why can two people with similar abilities get completely different results through training and similar circumstances, but when it comes down to the performance, why is it different? And then how do confidence, fear, motivation, and mindset influence performance? And what separates people from, operating and very consistently, efficiently, and making progress, and from those that are feeling stuck in a rut, things like that. So these are common threads that we'll keep coming back to throughout our podcasts. And between the two of us, we've spent a long time studying them. But I feel like it was our setbacks, it was our pressure of expectations, the challenges that we overcame that made us, stay more committed to, going through some of these endeavors and trying to explore some of the whys to these questions. Another thing that I feel like we've learned over the time was that a lot of these concepts, even though they definitely apply to athletes, they very much also apply to people in their everyday lives. I see it time and time again with more of the personal training side of things, where people are, either they have fear, they have lack of confidence, they have these different things that are applying to them in the gym or just their everyday lives, whether they're going to work and they're feeling some of these emotions. So some of the things that we'll talk about hopefully apply to just everyday people as well as normal athletes as well too. So our tagline and our concept that we want to keep coming back to is performance isn't just physical and success isn't just mental, it's how the two work together. And that's how we came upon Where Mindset Meets Movement. So episode 1, we're going to be talking about performance gap. So the main question that we're applying is, why can two athletes with the same physical talent produce completely different results under pressure? So my question to you is, have you seen this before? And why do some athletes just consistently outperform despite having maybe similar talent or similar upbringing, things like that?
Yeah, I think this topic is one that in many ways is sort of the centerpiece of the podcast in general for us, because I think both of us had some experiences as athletes where we felt as though we had successes throughout our career. I can certainly speak to my own swimming career. There were times where I was highly successful, and as I framed it, right? I was a state champion in swimming. I was a state record holder, got to swim at an elite Division I university with some of the best athletes in the world, countless Olympic athletes, and simultaneously had many personal experiences where I felt like the way I was performing was less than the training that I had done. And even that was feedback I would get sometimes from coaches, from teammates, and it wasn't just me, of course. There were always athletes in my team, I'm sure in your teams as well, who were labeled sort of the people that rose to the occasion when the pressure was greatest, and other athletes who everyone said they kind of choke under pressure, or that, they never are able to perform as well as they do in a training environment. And so I think this is such a meaningful topic because it's one that is personally relevant for both of us. And I think certainly for me, it's why I got into this work in the first place, was because I felt that there probably were some strategies, some perspectives that could be instilled that would have helped an athlete like my young self to either A, maximize my performance better, or B, just be more comfortable and happy with my performance. And so, to sort of long story short, I think the answer is absolutely. I see it often. And I'd love to hear also like your experiences with this as well. And kind of, I imagine you see it both in your previous arc as an athlete, but then now in your work as a personal trainer.
Yeah, definitely. I think from the time period as an athlete, I would see it when like you're given very specific training regimens, like, and a lot of times you're literally running the same exact pace as everyone that you're right next to in your workouts. And then despite all of those similar circumstances, you know, on race day, people would have a wide variety of different placements. And I think one place that we can start with this is, what are some of those physical components that could potentially be reasons for that? And then what are some of the mental reasons for that? Just to hop right into this and get it going.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad that you framed it that way. And I think it's like super consistent with our overarching philosophy for this idea that it's neither the mental nor the physical in isolation, but rather a combination of the two. I think from a physical perspective, uh, you can have two athletes that do the same workload and respond differently to it. I, predictably do a lot of work with swimmers and athletes in sports adjacent to swimming that are endurance sports. I did triathlons myself, and after my swimming career is over, and when it comes to endurance sports, something I love to do early in my work with athletes is to teach them about supercompensation. And obviously that's relevant for strength and conditioning as well, and even I think for skill development, if you kind of take it far enough out to the extremes. And the reason I share that with athletes is because I have this great model that demonstrates supercompensation and multiple trajectories. Basically, one trajectory is sort of your optimal trajectory. One of them is a trajectory that involves undertraining, essentially, like not stressing the body sufficiently. And the other is one in which the body is overtrained. And so you can take in the sort of logic ladder that this is, you can imagine that two athletes who have, their same age, they're the same, performance level on paper, could vary in the way that their body responds to training based on some genetic factors, like their predisposition to like put on muscle, to experience fatigue through strength training, through endurance training, and then all these other like environmental factors too. How well did they sleep? Did they break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend? Are they getting adequate nutrition? Are they fueling during practices? And for me, the reality is that there's so many variables like that it's impossible to isolate them.
Yeah, yeah.
And so for that reason alone, there's not much benefit in comparing your performance to that of another athlete, even if you think all the variables are the same, because it's literally impossible for them to be.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with that. And I think the things that you mentioned there are a lot of the things that, as a college athlete or most athletes think about. It's okay, are they eating well? Are they sleeping well? Are they, it's been drilled into their heads for coaches for, time and time and time and time again. And there's probably some element of subconsciously, you probably know within a practice, if you're pushing it a little bit harder than you should in order to stay with a group that's above you. And therefore you understand that on race day, it's okay if you're a little bit behind. So I think intuitively as athletes, we understand a lot of the physical things that need to be worked upon and the tangible things that you can improve in order to get to a better performance, things like that. I think the area that I think there's an opportunity for improvement for a lot of athletes and a lot of just individuals as a whole is, okay, what are now the mental side of things? What are the specific things that you can tangibly analyze one and understand as you as an individual and reflect on, okay, this is probably the place where instead of focusing on X during my performance, I was actually I was focusing on something that was maybe not so helpful. So I was wondering if maybe you could touch on, okay, those are the physical side. Now let's touch on some of the mental side of things to highlight. Maybe let's do three big things that could be a causal factor for a change in performance for the mental side of things.
I'll do my best with three. But I wanted to, you actually hit on one right away that I think is really relevant. You sort of mentioned this idea of the athlete knows that they're straining to like keep up with people, right? But what is their framework for whether or not that is appropriate to help them perform and to adapt, right? So many athletes, what they're taught is, well, you should just strive to be as good as the best people in your program.
Sure.
And you should, like, if you have to survive to keep up with them, eventually you will.
Yeah.
Right. And I even know coaches. I was in the coaching field for a decade, and many coaches who philosophically that's their mentality.
Yeah.
Is I've met coaches, and I don't mean to like denigrate the perspective, but I disagree with it to some extent, which is they would say like, well, if you've got one athlete who can make this like incredibly difficult interval, then you give them the entire lane and you just tell the other guys to like, you want to get in that lane, you got to go faster.
Right.
And so for some people that works. We kind of refer to that in swimming as like the cream rises approach. And so if you're highly talented and you have some of the genetic predispositions that can allow you to endure the training and adapt really well, then okay, like you may benefit from being challenged in that way. But what about the athlete who like they do that and they get overtrained? What about the athlete who they do that and they lose confidence rapidly because they just, no matter how hard they try, they can't keep up. And because they're overstraining, they're actually now getting to a point where the performance is harmed instead of improving, and now they're falling further behind. So already, like to me, one of the things is what's your mental framework for like knowing your body, for understanding how to get better and being with like really big, like psychologically flexible. So one thing, my work I really focus on with athletes is developing this concept of psychological flexibility, which is essentially the ability to go with it, to be able to be adaptive in different circumstances and not allow setbacks or unexpected events to be overly disrupting to your psychology or your physiology, such that you get really nervous and your body's stress response is not productive for you, or you start to do things that are uncharacteristic that do not put you in a position to be successful. So I mean, I think that would be, I'll start there with like that as a big idea.
Yeah, we could segue a lot of different directions with that. Let's break it down just into, okay, how does that apply maybe to your practices and being able to be flexible also with maybe how you're approaching the people that are on your team and, you know, what your coach is telling you to do and the intention for that individual practice. And then on competition day, let's give an example that maybe you are a golfer and the first beginning phase of the round, you know, the first 2 holes you played horribly. How do you then be flexible and then still maintain your attention and your awareness on some of the things that you really want to be focusing on versus the emotional response to those first couple rounds?
Yeah, so that's a perfect question. I'm a big advocate for a psychological technique called mindfulness acceptance commitment, or even more broadly, acceptance commitment therapy. That's been the domain that I've done the most like training in, because it's the one that I've seen in research academically when I was doing my dissertation on basically performing under pressure in swimming, to be one of the most successful. And effectively, when you look at that, it's about being able to zoom in on when I compete my best, what are the things that I consistently do? And when I don't, what are the precursors to that? And how can I anticipate what those precursors are and have a plan, a strategy to stay composed in that moment and deal with them and be consistent? And I think you asked about golf, for example, like look at what Rory McIlroy has been able to do the last couple of years in the Masters, right? The previous Masters being the one that I probably would draw from the most, because I was rooted for him, and he's known to get a little bit in his head.
Yeah.
He's been incredibly successful, but he's also had some major collapses at the end of rounds. And the thing that I most liked about his fourth round at the Masters, not this year, but the previous year when he finally broke through, was that he still struggled in the fourth round. And what I saw was psychological flexibility, where he was able to compartmentalize his failures and just continue to return back to the same process time after time after time. He did not deviate. He did not allow his failures to dictate his next decisions. He just tried to be consistent. I've heard Phil Mickelson talk about it before, like when he's the most off his game, when he's the most nervous, that what he does is he returns to the simplest of things. Well, what are the things that he's identified as being most essential to his swing? Is it, is it driving his hips? Is it, focusing on the ball? Is it, taking a deep breath before you set up? Whatever those things are, and it could be different for every athlete. But as simple as that may sound, I also think the simplicity of it is what's beautiful because it's doable, is being willing to trust your process, even when it doesn't immediately give you the result that you want. I think that's a really important tool for athletes to learn to develop that concept.
Yeah. I think this ties in a lot of different things too, because there's the element of flexibility. This sounds like you're applying the Rory McIlroy situation, but this also could apply to just anyone that has ever heard the term like choking under pressure. And it's ultimately the way that you're describing it makes me think that your brain is almost going haywire, and you're taking in emotions and a variety of different things that then make you shy your attention away from what you actually needed to be focusing on. I've read a little bit about a couple of different concepts that may or may not apply here.
Sure.
The first one is almost sort of that like bell curve of a stress response. So like certain athletes, they need, and maybe this is the difference between a competition versus a practice, where practice you might not have too much stimulus, and therefore you don't get too excited, and therefore you're able to perform at a certain level. But when a competition hits, your stress and response escalates, and therefore then you sort of rise to that occasion. Or what sometimes happens, I would imagine, in choking is that it actually becomes so high that you then no longer can focus on the exact thing that you need to be focusing on, the process, those external cues of, okay, I need to swing through my hips or whatever it is. Your brain just sort of goes haywire. Is that how you would explain choking, or is that something unrelated? Where am I?
No, I think I'm so excited that you brought it up. It is, to me, one of the most important concepts in this like phenomena of choking under pressure, which I think is really complicated, but that's great because we can continue to talk about it. So that effect like first emerged in the early 1900s. Yerke Dotson did research with mice on like physiological arousal. And so what you're alluding to is this upside down U. And the very simple way of putting it is that, when it comes to physical stress, the technical term for it in psychology is somatic anxiety, basically your body's stress response, that there's good data that demonstrates that the relationship between your performance in stressful situations and your body's stress response distributes as an inverse U, such that if you have insufficient arousal, physiological arousal, then you don't have the performance enhancing benefits that you get from adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortical arousal. Things like increased focus, like the ability to tolerate pain for longer periods of time, increased stamina, etc. But then,
would you say that most athletes in competition, they typically already have a lot of arousal? Or would you say that there are some athletes that they need to get psyched up in order to perform? Or would you say like 9 out of 10 it's the other way around, that they need less arousal? What would you say the percentage is there?
I would say that the lowest percentage is the people that need to be psyched up. I think there are circumstances in which you're going to see insufficient arousal, but generally speaking, if you care about what you're doing, you're going to have arousal.
You're going to be psyched.
Yeah. I mean, I do presentations all the time, and like, it doesn't matter how many I do. I teach classes all the time, and it doesn't matter how many. I could teach like 6 classes in 2 days, and I'm still nervous before I start speaking to the students. And that's a good thing. Like that's your body's way. It means your body's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So I would say, generally speaking, for many people in many circumstances, the physiological arousal is pretty good. But for the higher level you get to, the harder it is to control that. And I'll tell you a bit about some really cool science around that as well. So, there's kind of like, I won't get too much in the weeds on it, but there's sort of a fast process and a slow process when it comes to physiological arousal. So there's that initial response. Your body kind of is like, something's happening, so we're going to give you some adrenaline and cortisol,
Yeah.
and mostly on the adrenaline side. And then cortisol kind of comes in to regulate that. And so cortisol is a little bit more connected to your cognition. So that's like, we have somatic anxiety, your body stress. We have cognitive anxiety, that's your mind stress.
Yeah.
And so your thoughts about what's happening to you can sort of govern, to some extent, your cortical arousal. And the effect that I want to share with you that's really cool is that there's research that demonstrates that athletes that have international experience
Mm.
release the least amount of cortisol.
Oh, that's
Athletes that have national experience, they're in the middle. Athletes that only have regional experience, they release the most.
Wow.
And cortisol, excess cortical arousal, is the thing that I think is most related to that too much stress, so that other side of the curve, which is there's a sweet spot with the upside down U, where if you're in the middle, you have arousal, but you're not overstimulated.
Yeah.
Then you typically enter a space to perform your best. There isn't like a way of measuring like it's exactly this much.
Yeah.
It's an individual experience of what too much is for you. But if you are experiencing this, what I would say, this anxiety loop where your brain keeps telling your body like more, then you're at risk for being overstimulated. And that's what people typically experience when they're like really nervous. It's like I'm shaking, I can't breathe, feel like I'm going to be sick. I am sick. And that's that space where you don't perform as well. And so it's interesting that data that basically shows like the people that have experience, that are elite level athletes, they do not produce as much cortisol, so they are less likely to be in that space where they can't perform under pressure.
That's interesting. So in those scenarios where somebody is potentially has too much arousal, they're shaking, it isn't just like a little bit of elevated heart rate, that beginning somatic phase. Would you say that those individuals that are very good at maintaining that perfect part of the parabola, and that was a nice alliteration,
Yes.
that they potentially are good at reframing the situation and viewing those initial phases as, okay, this is a normal occurrence. This is, my body's way of getting excited. And they're almost looking through their competition as an opportunity. Like, are they really good at almost understanding the flow of what's about to happen? And therefore, there's not a secondary response of flight or flight? Or do you think that they wait for it to occur and then they have very good reactive processes towards this, whether it's breath work, meditation, whatever it is, they have that reactive capability to then bring their arousal level to the correct, or is it a combination of both?
It's definitely a combination of both, but I think that could still be a satisfying answer. There are people who physiologically, they deal with stress differently. They produce less cortisol naturally. There's, you look at just the different experiences people have with just their overall health. You know that like some people have chronic stress, some people, get really nervous, some people have anxiety disorders, and these things can intersect.
Yeah.
So, but you can take that like down its like furthest reaches from a logic perspective. And if someone can have a generalized anxiety disorder, then that would suggest that within the population, there's a biological component to your experience of anxiety. There's also a big piece of this, which I think is environmental. And we can look to the finals that just occurred.
Yeah.
Go Knicks, Knicks in 5.
Go Knicks. Yeah.
And you can't tell me that Victor Wembanyama is a choker.
Yeah.
Right. But he missed some really important free throws in Game 4.
Sure.
And in many, the common way of, the layman way of talking about that is, well, they've never been there before. It's their first time being in the finals, and you have to suffer and you have to have experiences in order to get over the mountaintop, or to the mountaintop, so to speak. And that is also how anxiety works. So our brain, our caveman brain are designed to be more alert when something is novel, something is new. And so the first time you're in an experience, I think, you can have techniques that can certainly help you, and I'm sure we'll talk about those. You can have some biological armor potentially that helps you manage stress, but generally speaking, like you're going to be more nervous the first time you do something that is new. And so that is also a contributing factor. That's why like I don't love the term choking under pressure,
Yeah.
although it can occur for sure. But I think it's overused
Yeah.
because some of that is sort of the nature of the circumstance. Like
Sure.
to me, the Spurs had a disadvantage because they're young. They haven't been there. The Knicks players are more veteran players and they've dealt with failure. And so when they got to that level, albeit for some of them their first finals, although not all of them, but they've been in the playoffs, they've played a lot of close games. They're probably not experiencing as much physiological arousal in those really tight moments because it's not novel for them anymore.
Yeah.
And that's something that's hard to offset completely.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think when I think of your explanation there, I think of some of the extreme cases like Alex Honnold and his free soloing.
Yeah.
And like they did studies on his brain and he had that sort of underdeveloped amygdala and
Yes.
fear response. And I kind of just was wondering when I was watching that movie of like how much of this is like his predisposed sort of brain development versus how much of this is actually he has rehearsed some of these climbs so many times and he's been in these situations like time after time after time after time after time that then when he's on El Capitan's looking over a cliff, he has a different response to it than somebody that was, 12 years old and never been on a cliff before and all of a sudden is like looking down an amazingly massive cliff like that.
And you and I both know that we both love to climb.
Yeah.
And so we both followed him, I think, fairly closely.
Yeah.
And we also know that even though he was able to famously scale El Cap, he also has had times where with that same climb, he bailed because he got scared.
Yeah.
There's another climb in Yosemite that he like famously like looks over the edge and is like, I'm freaking out right now.
Yeah.
And so he both has this like biological genetic armor in that there's been documented like research done on his brain where his amygdala doesn't activate. It has a higher threshold for activation. So
Sure.
effectively the amygdala is actually quite similar to what I was referring to with the stress response where there's a fast pathway and a slow pathway. And so the fast pathway is kind of like, you should be scared because something is happening. And then you're like, oh, it's not a bear, it's a dog and I'm okay. And then it down regulates. And so he just has this high threshold where he could be in what for many people would be a terrifying situation and his amygdala just doesn't tell him that he's afraid.
Yeah.
And that's amazing if you're going to be a free soloer for your career. But then also one of my favorite parts about the film that documents his El Cap free solo is that he talks about his visualization practice and his logging practice.
Yeah.
And you see his logbook is like every single move and every thought pattern he has about those moves and like what he has to focus on and where the pressure is meticulously recorded and gone over and over and over again in his head. And so through that repetition, he's done some of these things. He's made it less novel for himself. I think to me, that's a big takeaway is, for him, he gets up there and he's like, I've done this a million times, whether that's with a rope, whether that's in my head visualizing, and I know exactly what I'm going to do. And so then he simplifies it to just managing the stress at that point, which is if I notice that I'm stressed, I just calm myself down. I become very mindful. I focus on what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I get back to what I'm doing. And there's, watch enough of his stuff, you can kind of see that process play out. There's another great video with him and like the famous climber Magnus, where he takes him free soloing. And that's another really insightful video to watch if you want some insight into that process, because there he's like coaching somebody through the fear of free soloing.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you get an insight into his inner monologue.
Sure.
Because I'm sure he's been in those moments before, and that's why he's able to kind of talk this guy through it.
Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah, I think anyone that looks at that hasn't experienced climbing and just thinks that he's absolutely crazy, bonkers, and there's a little bit of that's probably a little bit true, but you don't see so much of the preparation that went into that in order to make him as successful as he is as a climber and as a person that's able to work through immense emotions and also systematize it in a way that he can then describe it to other people. But yeah, I still look at those climbs and I just pray that it's a light gravity day or something because it's just insane. So I wanted to pivot and talk about just some other concepts because I could probably go on this specific one for a while, but there's a lot that we want to squeeze in. So the next one is just kind of delving into how certain athletes might have sort of this idea of an outcome that's in their head and how that can sometimes potentially be helpful or not helpful. And what's the difference between being motivated towards a certain outcome versus just having overall goals? And then do you mind just breaking those two down independently so that we can touch on a few other different psychological concepts that I think would be helpful for people?
Yeah. I think the difference between expectations and goals would be sort of implied in goals is this idea that this is something that I hope to accomplish, but I recognize that there may be a degree of probability that it's not going to occur versus an expectation is something that you expect is going to happen. And that provides an opportunity to talk about, like in psychology research, you've probably heard of like SMART goals, but that stuff all comes from like seminal research in psychology. And one of the things that's often cited in psych as it pertains to goals is that a goal with about a 50% degree of difficulty, or I should say 50% perceived probability of success, is one that often is cited as one of the most effective in terms of motivation. And maybe taking a further bigger step back, like in that work, the objective of goals is to serve as a source of motivation. And so philosophically for me in the sort of mental performance world, the thing that I often emphasize with athletes and coaches as well, because I've had some really cool conversations with coaches about how do I incorporate goal setting into my program in a way that's productive, is I always try to bring them back to like this guiding light of, are the goals helping you or are they hurting you? And the answer can be different depending on your expectations. So, and I think that allows for some individual differences in the goal setting process as well, that if you're somebody who can set really audacious goals, then, and that's extremely motivating for you, and that's a thing that helps you hit the alarm at 5 a.m. and get up and go do the thing you got to do, then keep doing that. But if you're the person that sets audacious goals and when you fail, you feel like useless, you feel helpless, you feel like less than, then maybe that isn't a good goal for you because it's not doing the thing it's supposed to do. And I think that that's a really important thing that coaches and athletes have to assess when it comes to their goal setting process is like, how are these goals serving you? And feeling like you can be flexible in your goal setting process and flexible with your goals if you feel like the information that you're receiving isn't pointing to the progress that you're seeking. Because the other big thing in goals, we can talk about any of these different directions, is this concept of discrepancy. So the thing that's supposed to provide motivation with goals is there's a discrepancy between where I am and where I want to be. And so there are even individual differences in regards to how that makes us feel. So some people, when they experience that discrepancy, they are highly motivated by it because they just want to, they're the type of people that like always want to check the box. Like, I'm not where I want to be. So how do I make this anxiety go away and get to where I want to go? And there are other people who, when there's discrepancy for them, like the way that they use it is a little bit different. Like they may, if they feel like there's a lack of discrepancy, then they might want to create it for themselves so that they feel like that juice. I need something to get me going. And then others who, when they feel a discrepancy, it feels like I'm bad, like I'm not good enough. And there's lots of interesting things in personality theory even that can kind of speak to that. So
my brain went a lot of different directions with where we could take this, but the first one was just wanting to simplify what you just described also for individuals that are not necessarily athletes, but say you're just an avid gym goer and you want to lose some weight potentially, being able to create goals that potentially are within that 50% world or essentially, like, I guess, let me ask you how you would apply that exact
Yeah.
same concept to somebody that was just trying to lose a little bit of weight, or, they want to improve their bench press by a little bit. And when they don't achieve that, sometimes they get into some negative self-talk. So how would you work through that?
Yeah. So I think the first place I would start, and I know it seems like so simple, but maybe a different take on it, is you want to set both short and long-term goals. And so the research on this is the long-term goal is meaningful because it's the reason you're doing the thing.
Yep.
So usually, what is that? Because you have to make this gets into like other theories like expectancy value theory, but you're choosing to do something hard and you're choosing to do it because you expect that you could succeed and it's important to you.
Yep.
And so there's opportunity cost with that. So if I choose to go to the gym, I am choosing to go to the gym in lieu of furthering my social life, in lieu of getting sleep if I have to wake up early in the morning to go to the gym, in lieu of maybe feeling healthy all the time because maybe there's a risk of injury by like being in a weight room for the first time or whatever the different downsides are, right? And so you have this like long-term goal and you want to set a good long-term goal that is sufficiently motivating for you to like take that first initial step, which is really hard. It's really hard to change things.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do something, especially if you're not sure it's going to occur.
Yeah.
And then you need short-term goals because we need like that dopamine hit of seeing success, seeing progress, because the reality of a good, properly structured long-term goal is that it's supposed to be long-term.
Yeah.
So if it were like something you could do next week, it wouldn't be a long-term goal.
Yeah.
And if it was something you do next week, then it wouldn't really motivate you to do anything special.
Yeah.
And so you do want like the big thing, but then human nature is that if it is a good long-term goal, you're theoretically failing at it every day
Yeah.
until you get there, which could be 6 months from now, a year from now, 18 months from now. So the short-term goals then are both to help assess, like, am I getting closer,
Sure.
to like reinforce the process that's going to help you get there, and also to make you feel better so that you are able to sustain the motivation to help you get to this really far away place when that's going to require like a very long exertion of discipline or effort or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like I have so many clients that are kind of perfectionists,
Yeah.
and they find that they have this very specific goal of, okay, I want to decrease my weight by 5 pounds, and what they don't realize that in between that, there's actually a lot of other potential short-term goals that could be happening in the midst of that. Like they might be, in order to do that, they need to set process-related things. They need to get 7 hours of sleep. They need to consistently, work out 3 times a week. They need to get 8,000 steps per day kind of thing. Like all of those different things, if they are consistently doing it, then maybe they would see a change in and the weight, or even what they don't realize is that there's a lot of positive, fun things that can come along the way. And they're almost sort of so blindsided by some of their pie in the sky goal that they don't realize that those other positive things are happening, like they are getting stronger along the way, or they do actually have more energy, or they do, feel just a little bit more confident despite not hitting that specific objective goal.
Yeah.
I wanted to spin off of that and just go into back more towards the athletic world and how your potential failure of not hitting a goal or not hitting an outcome could potentially tie into your identity as an athlete, and how that also might be creating some sort of emotional response as a result of your outcome and event, or your leading up to that event, how that frames sort of your level of arousal or stress going into it.
Yeah, I think we're setting up a lot of topics we could like keep building on over the course of the next like several months.
You nailed it. Yeah.
There is a concept called identity foreclosure that's often cited around this phenomenon you're referring to. Essentially, this idea that an athlete, because their athletic identity, basically their sense of self as it pertains to their success in their sport, are so closely aligned that effectively how they feel about themselves is anchored to how they perform.
Yeah.
Which is potentially extraordinarily problematic, especially in athletics especially athletics being competitive,
Yep.
where you could be excellent at what you do objectively and still fail a lot. The classic example that's always given, if you're, one of the best baseball players in the world, your failure rate is still 70%, right? If you're hitting 300. And so that mentality can be really harmful in a way that can harm your ability to continue to progress. And then it gets into like that initial question about like expectations and then how you're framing progress and then your body's response as a result. So I think, you talked about the importance of having the ability to sort of take an inventory of the things you're doing well. Well, if your mentality is that my success in sport is what's most important for my sense of self, and then you fail and you don't have the tools to see the things you're doing well,
Yeah.
then you potentially now are losing motivation. You're questioning like your purpose overall as like in the world, like what am I
Yeah. Big
doing?
time. Yeah.
And without any real solution as to like how to move forward at that point.
Yep.
And then from a physiological perspective, like all the nerves and stress that you would then take into your next performance, because now you're carrying with you the weight of like who I am will be determined by the outcome of this performance
Yeah.
in a space where you don't necessarily, at least from my perspective, and the thing I work with a lot of athletes on is you don't know, like no matter how much control you have, no matter how well you prepare, you don't know for sure that you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
And these, again, go back to any of these things that we watch on TV, the golf, the basketball finals, like swimming Olympics, there are such small margins that you will invariably fail in circumstances in which you set yourself up for success.
So what do you do?
So in those moments, I think there's a number of things that you can like work on, right? One of them is kind of coming back. You mentioned perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
I like to really have that conversation with athletes about, it's okay to hold yourself to a high standard, but in what ways is this causing you problems? The terminology in the MAC, the Mindfulness Acceptance Commitment Framework, is hooking thoughts. So is your belief that I cannot make a mistake then causing you to panic when you're on the golf course when you shank a shot? And does that panic as a result then lead to heightened cortical arousal, which then makes it harder for you to focus, makes it harder for you to downregulate in a way that helps you perform your best? Or you start to make choices that are, especially like golf is a great example.
Yeah.
You're like, normally I would lay up here, but I bogeyed the last hole.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go for the green. Now you hit it into the woods and you've compounded a mistake and you're making yourself even more upset. So I think that it's really important to sort of assess, like, in what ways are these things not serving you? That's like one bucket.
Yep.
Another really classic bucket is being able to affirm a greater sense of self, like to start to address that identity foreclosure. And that's, heavier work, but, why are you an athlete? Why are you competing? And what does that say more about you globally? And what I love about that, and I do that a lot with athletes as well, is it gives you something that you have complete control over that's independent of outcome. So I'll give you like an example really quickly would be, for me, an affirmation that I really like to use, which really helps me as an athlete to not have too much identity foreclosure, is I affirm my sense of mental toughness.
Sure.
And it's something that it's a value that is global, meaning it's bigger than my sense of identity as an athlete. It's in the same way that like being a father or being a good like partner would be theoretically like more global than being a good athlete. And it lends perspective. And so I take pride in my mental toughness. And so that helps to take away some of the pain of if I fail, I still have that, right? It's still there. And the other thing, coming back to my initial point, is it gives me some guidance as to like, okay, like things are happening that are a little bit outside of my control, but what's one thing that I can always do? I can always figure out a way to exert mental toughness, to exhibit mental toughness. And so, that's at least I think a starting point of some of the things that you can do to help to sort of unhook from the feelings that go along with that tied up sense of self.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned the global identities. Do you think there's any benefit to in literally just concentrating on working on promoting those other forms of identity as well too, so that you don't feel like your only sense of identity is as an athlete or as somebody that's, trying to work out in the gym or whatever it is, but reframing it and sort of looking at yourself as something bigger than just that one thing and actively working towards maintaining relationships with friends or actively working towards, becoming a better professional in whatever you're passionate about. Or do you think that's relevant here, or is that something that's sort of sidetracked
No,
from?
no, no, it's totally relevant. It's exactly one of the things that the research points to is that, and I like the way you called it an active process, because that's what it is. It's the act of exploring my whole identity.
Mm,
So a lot of work with like mental performance coaches and sports psychologists would be on, hey, like, what are your passions outside of sport?
sure.
What are the things that you're also good at? What are the things you also care about? And drawing attention to those things and even giving yourself permission to explore them. And that's something that I think is really important as well. And it gets complex when it comes to sort of the nature of sports today and in the US and specialization and everyone specializing earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is hard to compete if you don't develop certain skill sets by a certain age. But at the same time, it promotes more of that possibility of that foreclosure of all I've done is gymnastics for the
Sure.
last 15 years and I don't even know
Who am
who
I
I
outside
am.
of that? Yeah. Yeah.
And beyond that, like this is something I teach in my psychology courses. I do psychology and motivation. And we talk about like there's research that shows that when athletes retire, that if they retire and they tell themselves they retire because I'm pursuing a graduate degree
Mhm.
or I'm going to do an internship or I'm going to start my career, they have greater psychological well-being, greater satisfaction, happiness, comfort with the decision. The athletes that have the least psychological well-being, that are most harmed psychologically by retirement, are the ones that don't have a sense of autonomy in that decision.
Mhm.
They retire because they can't perform anymore. They retire because they get hurt, something outside of their control, or they did not have a plan for after.
Mhm.
And you see it a lot, like in professional sports. And I think you can tell that it's important because the leagues prioritize it. Like in the NFL and the NBA, they have people come in and they work with them on when you retire, like what are
Yeah.
you going to do? Like we need to make sure that you have a purpose in life after you're done with your sport.
Yeah.
So it obviously matters, and it's obviously a problem that the professional leagues see that enough so that they're pouring resources into trying to be preventative in that area with their athletes.
Yeah, I wish they had some of those preventative services for people that weren't even at that professional level, because I think
Yeah.
so many people, once they finish kind of whatever level of college athletics or even high school athletics, they sort of struggle with what's next after that. Um, so just coming back to the original question of sort of, why do some athletes sort of fail under pressure or, not fail, but working through those specific moments of when you're in an event, when you're in a competition, why do some succeed and some sort of struggle under that spotlight? Is there any other psychological concepts and things that you could think of that we haven't touched on already that you think are still relevant and still good to have conversations around?
Yeah, I think I'll introduce two, and I'm sure this will be ongoing conversations, but I do think we talked about like psychological flexibility. I think it's also important to address that stress response because I do think it's a big part of the equation.
Yeah.
That for many athletes, and not just athletes, right? Public speakers, for example, anyone who's in any situation in which they feel nervous and they feel like their nerves get the better of them, that is in part a physical experience.
Sure.
So, to me, there's like the two modalities that influence your stress. One of them is your actual body itself. You can address what your body's feeling and downregulate. And then the other is the role that the mind is playing in facilitating the process of increasing your stress response. And there are lots of things that you can do, but I'll bring up one. So I'll start with the mind. I tend to think the mind is, this may be counterintuitive, but the more powerful of the two. But I do think the downregulatory stuff is really important. So one thing that I think, if we never did another episode again, I want people to know is that when you try to suppress negative thoughts, your preoccupation with them actually increases. And so one of, I think, the most important things to help manage that phenomenon of choking under pressure is learning that it is okay to be afraid of failing. It's okay to hear those voices in your head that say like, you're going to mess up. What if something goes wrong? the advice that so many people give is, well, just block it out.
Yeah.
Like, think
Yeah.
positively. And that's a frustrating thing for many athletes to hear because they're like, I'm trying, like it's not happening. But they take comfort in knowing that that's actually how your brain works. Like, that's also research based. There's really cool research. Like, researchers asked participants to think about or not think about like a polar bear. So like, all right, like I want you to try either, they basically like shown them a picture of a white polar bear, and one group was given no further instruction. The other group was told to try not to think about it.
Yeah.
And then like every couple minutes they would ring a bell and be like, hey, like, what are you thinking about? So the graph's really fascinating. So the group that was given like no further instruction, their thoughts about the polar bear slowly decreased. No one told them they couldn't think about it. They thought about it for a little bit, and eventually they stopped thinking about it.
Mm.
The group that was told not to think about it, over time, their preoccupation with the polar bear actually increased. So in their effort to try and suppress, it actually increased their preoccupation with the thoughts. And then in motor skills, what we know is that when you have preoccupation with potential failures, that induces things like overthinking, you have like cognitive overload, and actually your error rates increase. So when people are really concerned about failing, they actually make more mistakes. So to me, the great place to start is being just okay with making some space for those thoughts. Then the work becomes like, what's your relationship with your stress response? What are the things you're going to say to yourself additionally? So I'm not just saying like, sit there at the free throw line and be like, I'm going to fail, and just let that be the only thing that's going on in your head.
Yeah.
But allow that to be there. Don't try and suppress it, because if you kind of let it be, it will eventually soften, most likely.
Yep.
So to me, that's like, from a mental perspective, one of the most important things. And then, of course, like I said, you can get into the other like elements of what you want to be thinking of in lieu of that. And then if you want, I can get into down regulation as well.
Let's just talk through explain like high level what specific things you're talking about when you're talking about down regulation.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
that's
that
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when we talk about down regulation, we're talking about what are you doing physically with your stress. So can you do anything that makes your stress go down?
Yep.
And so some of the big ones for that, breathing exercises. You should speak to that at some point, because you're really devoted to that, and I think that it helps. But a couple of classic ones, the box breathing, which a lot of like kids are taught, and something called cyclic sighing. Both of them, the commonalities for both of those breathing exercises is they involve elongated breathing, respiration. You're slowing down your breathing, and your breathing is sort of tied to your sympathetic nervous system response activation. And the other thing that they have in common is they involve really extended, forceful exhalations. And those are the things that are most important when it comes to helping your body reduce its sympathetic nervous system activation, i.e. your stress, to be less stressed. There's some other things as well, things like grounding exercises, which is basically just being mindful, like focusing on bodily sensations, like things you can see and touch and feel, or even like mindfulness meditation, like body scans, and movement, light movement, dynamic warm-ups, like walking around, are other things that you can do to reduce your stress. And so they all matter. And I think it's helpful for athletes to know that there are tools that can like immediately reduce your stress response. There's even other stuff about like vagus nerve stimulation, and like putting your face in like ice. So there are a number of different tools. I find my philosophy on that, like working with athletes, is playing around with having a toolkit, figuring out what works for you, because every sport is different, everyone's body is different. But I think the biggest takeaway from the down regulatory techniques is just this knowledge that I can do something.
Yeah.
And for many athletes that are really nervous and feeling like they can't perform their best under pressure, they're throwing up before they perform or whatever it may be, anything to start is really helpful, and it can kind of kickstart the work on the mental side, which I think can be more sustainable, because that's the part that is ultimately sort of determining your stress response, but is a really good place to begin, and also a great way to incorporate sort of a pre-performance routine, or even the mid-performance like way of down regulating that could be valuable for you.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that each person has their own individual response to some of these different tools. I've worked with a number of people that, for whatever reason, meditation is not for them,
Yep.
but breath work, actually, they find that their thoughts aren't going everywhere. The thoughts can still go anywhere, and they're still going to get that physiological response. And then conversely, I've had people that hate breath work, but feel like if they're sitting in a quiet place, then they can have their sort of thoughts come down and feel just somatically or bodily that they feel calmer and more focused and attentive, and that their brain isn't jumping all over the place. So I think it's so true that each person can have their own sort of response to it, and probably the more that they can practice, even just on a daily routine, or even in non-game scenarios or competition scenarios, they might feel more confident in that ability to downregulate as they go into whatever endeavor it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've even had athletes for whom like different breathing exercises, they have preferences.
Yeah, I
Um,
know I do. Yeah,
yeah, like the box breathing involves breath holding. The cyclic side doesn't involve breath holding, and some people like that. They like the way one feels more than the other. And that really speaks. I mean, they're supposed to do the same thing, but it does speak to like the role that individual differences play in this.
I literally feel like I'm gonna die when I do box. Like, I don't like holding my breath, but
4 seconds.
the physiological side, I could knock out of the park for hours and be totally fine.
Yep.
But yeah, it's really interesting. Any other thoughts in regards to the specific question of if there's two athletes that have the same talent, why does one, perform well under pressure and why one does not? I feel like we've created a pretty comprehensive list of some different psychological touch points that also will probably come into future episodes. But if there's any other closing thoughts, now is a good time.
I like where we left it. I
Yeah.
think that there is going to be a lot of opportunity to explore each of these things that we've introduced separately, and to start to incorporate like some of our own experiences with this, both in our athletic careers as well as with our work with athletes. And that I think will be really exciting and interesting for the audience to hear these concepts be sort of expanded upon, and their relevance in day to day for athletes in a variety of different contexts and different types of sports and situations, etc.
Yeah, I completely agree. So that's all I have for today. But thanks so much for taking the time to get out here to Iona.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Happy to be
It's
here.
been fun.
Excited hope to continue this work. I think it's good stuff and it's important.
Wonderful.